Let's move into our next session. Moderating will be someone whose name may sound familiar to many of you. Libby Carnahan is a marine scientist who serves as the Florida Sea Grant Marine Extension Agent for Pinellas County. In that capacity, she helps plan, develop, and implement comprehensive marine education programs that focus on marine industries, fisheries, and habitat issues, including coastal hazards and climate change issues that impact marine and coastal areas, predominantly in Pinellas County. And especially relevant to our topic are her efforts as the facilitator of the Tampa Bay Climate Science Advisory Panel. Let's welcome her warmly. Good to have you with us, Libby.
All right, thank you, and I invite our panelists to make their way to the stage. All right, well, thank you all so much for being here. Those in Tampa, we were applauding for you making the trip across the bay. We know, even though our bridges are always functioning or mostly functioning all the time, it's hard sometimes to get over the mental barrier of crossing the bridge. We've seen a lot of information this morning. A lot of it can be overwhelming, especially when we kind of talk out to 2100, which is quite a ways away, and as we said, kind of outside some of our pool of worry. I am very optimistic about planning for sea level rise and climate change in our region, which might seem contradictory to some of the overwhelming scientific information that we've been presented with. But I'm optimistic in large part because of those folks that we have on this panel right now. We are addressing the science of sea level rise and climate change in our region, and the local governments are engaging in incorporating sea level rise and climate change science into adaptation action. So we're going to have several different speakers be talking about that with us this morning. So I'd like to, we'll start in just 1 minute with Honorable Al Johnson, the mayor of St. Pete Beach. And then I'd like to go next with Sharon Wright. We're going to kind of increase in spatial capacity as we move. Sharon Wright, the Sustainability and Resiliency Director of the City of St. Petersburg. And then we'll go on to Kelli Levy, the Director of Environmental Management for Pinellas County. And then CJ Reynolds, Director of Resilience and Engagement for the Tampa Bay Regional Planning Council. They're going to speak for about 5 minutes each. You guys prepared? And then we're going to have lots of time for questions. So I have some questions, and I hope that you all have a lot of questions because we want to direct the audience, we want to direct the conversation with where you would like it to go. So let me look at my timer here. Okay. All right, Al, go on ahead.
You got a timer, huh?
I'm going to.
I don't think that's on, is it?
It's
Yes,
no alarm,
okay.
but just me.
No alarms. Okay, we do that at commission meetings. So, I'm the mayor of St. Pete Beach. In case you don't know, we're not part of St. Petersburg. We're the southernmost barrier island in Pinellas County. That being said, we're an island. We're 5.5 miles long and about a half mile wide at the widest point. Got somewhere close to 10,000 permanent residents. Got another 10,000 that own property there that come down during the season, and then we can have as many as 30,000 tourists. So we can be 50,000 people on one day and 10,000 the next. It all varies. It's kind of a challenge. But we're a full-service city, and the main reason we are is because we have a very robust tourism economy. Unlike the rest of the barrier islands in Pinellas County, we have we get the biggest tourist destination on the west coast of Florida with the Trade Winds Resort in our town. So we're always fighting a balance between being a little Gulf Coast beach town and being an international resort destination. So it's the challenge we live with day in, day out. We have a population that I think the median age is about 59. Average number of people in a household is less than 2. It's 1.85. So that says there's a lot of people living alone on the island. And it's a very it's an affluent community. Average income is $55,000 a year. So that's above what the national average is for a household. So it's a nice community, and we have several things going on when it comes to doing projects. We're mostly infrastructure. You know, we talked a little bit earlier, you know, about the timing with sea level rise, and it affects us because you're living on a barrier island. We're only 5 feet above sea level. Probably 90% of the island is that low. We get a strong storm out of the west and a high tide, and we're in trouble. There's an intersection right outside of City Hall that if we get a king tide, which happens, every 3 months or something like that, the intersection fills up with about 1.5 feet of salt water. It comes up through the drains. So we know we've got a problem. Fortunately, we are on a different timeline than the people in southeast Florida, so we've got some time, and we are doing some things now. In fact, we have a contract that's been let to a consulting firm to tell us what we should be doing to combat sea level rise in the future. Right now, we're concentrating on infrastructure projects, and along with those, some really major drainage projects. Every place we dump stormwater into Boca Ciega Bay, we're putting in baffle boxes that block high tide events so it doesn't come up into our streets. So we are doing that right now, and we're actually in our third major project out of about 5 that are on the books. But you talk about timing and looking at the end of this century, and I've got people who glaze over if you tell them we're planning on projects that are 3 to 5 years down the road. They think that why bother? But right now we're doing a lot of work, particularly on our sewer system. Thank God that I don't have the problems that Mayor Kreisman does in St. Petersburg. He's got a treatment problem. I have a transportation problem. We have a lot of broken sewer pipes and stuff like that, and we've been working on them for close to 10 years now. We've put well over $10 million into them, and we got a lot going on now. And each time we do a major project, the sewer system is involved in it. So we're now upgrading. So our big challenge is finding the money, and it seems to be universal. No matter what you want to do, it's the money that sort of drives everything. The consulting aspect of it with sea level rise is we're looking long term to see what we need to do now to try and minimize the effect of sea level rise on our community, and go forward with that, and doing what we can to minimize our carbon footprint as well. We're working with the county on a bunch of things that some of them transportation related. We'd like to see nothing but electric buses from PSTA, but that hasn't happened yet. They're moving that direction as well, and I'm sure that's also a money problem in the final analysis. But we're fortunate. We live in paradise, but when a strong wind comes off the Gulf and a huge, even a big thunderstorm comes in, we know how susceptible we are to the environment. And but then every now and then the sun goes down over a clear sky, and that's why they call us the sunset capital of Florida. So we're happy to live there, and we hope we can live there a long time. We just need to make sure we stop planning. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mayor Johnson. Okay, Sharon, I'd like to go to you.
Afternoon, Sharon Wright, Sustainability and Resiliency Director for the City of St. Petersburg, the 4th largest city in Florida. That Mayor Johnson brought it up. The beach is not incorporated. I think outside of here, people, or maybe even outside the city, people think of us as the postcard Green Bench community. And so now everywhere I go, like I'll talk in a minute about winning the Bloomberg American Cities Climate Challenge. But when we go up to national things like that, I just start with 4th largest city. Orlando just passed us. We actually employ people, and we love the beach, but we don't get to incorporate them, and that sort of thing. So we are about 260,000 people, and we have some large employers like Jabil, Raymond James, and we have some neat entrepreneurial and businesses that start downtown. A lot of data analytics. We have iHeartMedia, and we have something called the Greenhouse, which is a place where people can be very entrepreneurial, but also works a lot on workforce readiness, and they are really busy. We are doing really neat things across the business sector. Our demographics, our median age has changed, and I forget the numbers off the top of my head. I've been in St. Pete 5 years, but it seemed that previously it was up in the upper 50s or so, and now it's in the lower 40s for our median age. So we're changing every day, and the calls and the questions we get every day are changing towards that as well. And I think it's that community change, in addition to some other factors in leadership and obvious data that we can see in our own backyard at the College of Marine Science and the airport, that was the impetus for us to be planning. I think our community has been demanding it more. I don't think I would have this job. I work in the city's very first Office of Sustainability and Resiliency, established by Mayor Kreisman. And he is very proactive in this stuff, but without the community support, I don't know if it could have happened. So I think that's a lot of the impetus for us doing some of the planning that we're doing, and I'm very honored and excited to be a part of it. What was the next thing? Yeah, that's good. So what are we doing now? I'm going to take the rest of the day. What aren't we doing now? Some highlights might include, as it relates especially to sea level rise and resiliency planning. City Council recently supported a green building ordinance for city facilities, and that green building ordinance has 3 parts. It talks about any city facility that is a building at a certain size must certify with LEED certification or an acceptable alternative to certifying, forcing us to do better with energy efficiency, water conservation, materials, and general context of a project. Another part of that ordinance is to look at any infrastructure project of a certain size, and there's something out there called Envision, which I learned about from Kelli when I first got here at Pinellas County. They were already using it. We have put in an ordinance that projects of a certain size must be certified using that system. And if you haven't heard of that system, but you have heard of LEED or green certifications for buildings, it's not the same, but it's a similar idea in that it takes you through an integrated process to do a better job of planning ahead and being efficient about your projects, in short. The third part of that ordinance says that we must use the most recent, best available science for sea level rise and related climate change effects, and that's really basically steering people to look at what Libby's group is doing in the most recent sea level rise projections, and things like that are currently being used in all of the work we're doing for our infrastructure improvements. Mayor Johnson mentioned some issues that St. Pete has had. We're doing much better. We've invested millions and millions of dollars, and we continue to do so. But the foundation of a lot of that modeling that we're doing to fix our water system and our sewer system is using the work of our local scientists and our regional sea level rise projections. So we're just sort of codifying that in that ordinance. And I don't know that the ordinance is perfect. We're kind of seeing how these thresholds and things work out. We want to apply it to the right projects or apply it programmatically so that we're not increasing costs up front for no reason, although we know there's a life cycle cost benefit to that. We're also currently working to bring a green fleet policy to the city. When I looked, we had not changed our fleet policy since 1999, and it was just about buying vehicles. So that'll be interesting. Right now it's just a policy, and then we really have to run data to see what we can do, but we're already taking steps in the interim to do that, to look at going electric and things like that. We're working on a park and plug program for electric vehicle infrastructure. That's a result of some Duke Energy settlements that they also agreed to put EV infrastructure throughout certain communities with certain criteria. So we're excited about having that sort of be a little boon to our EV infrastructure. Those are some sort of recent things that we've been talking to City Council and the community about. In the city of St. Pete, you may or may not know, we're building up here. It's my understanding that all these projects we're working on, any one of them standing alone might be one of the bigger ones we've ever worked on in the history of our incorporation, but we're actually working on a brand new pier district. We just opened a brand new police headquarters with the largest PV system on a city facility to date at 478 kilowatts. We haven't really built a building the last couple of years without solar PV, by the way. We have a police training center opening up. A new fire station just opened up. A regional skate park opened up about a year ago. Airport hangar redevelopment. All of these are going on at the same time. And a little small project known as 85 acres of downtown redevelopment at Tropicana Field. So that's some of the things going on. What I'm really, and of course our One Water and infrastructure approach. I'm very excited to let you know that today online, our final and first ever city's integrated sustainability action plan is online. It's going to be going to City Council for support and approval, hopefully. The Bloomberg climate team and partners that are working with us as of recently, I was so proud. I was showing them, look, we have the draft. This was the draft before. This is the final in my hand. And this is just the highlights report. There's also 500 pages of technical stuff you can read if, you know, you don't have anything else to do this weekend. But they said this is the first sustainability action plan like this where they had a manhole on the cover. And I was like, listen, we're transparent about everything, and if we don't and if we don't talk about this, then what are we talking about? Also, I'm very proud of something in here that is very honest about our equity issues. We call ourselves out in here about a black and white issue in St. Petersburg, and we're asking for budget to deal with some of that internally and externally. But more than that, there's just a lot of great co-beneficial things that we need to invest in and continue to work with our community in. So I encourage you to take a look at that. And then I'll wrap up with, because of all of the work that we have been doing, not just what I just said, but in investing in a solar co-op in our community, in investing in other nonprofits that are helping to finance energy efficiency and solar energy, all of our community partners and the work we were able to demonstrate from the last few years since the mayor created this office. We were awarded in January the Bloomberg American Cities Climate Challenge Award. That has given us a network of partners that I won't take so long to list, but we're getting to meet with the planetary experts on renewable energy, Rocky Mountain Institute, World Resources Institute. They assign those people to be on our team to help us deliver some of our goals a little faster, and we're going to be hiring a climate advisor, and that will be paid for by Bloomberg and sit in our office. Also, this effort has put our name out there, so I don't want to be cavalier and fingers crossed. You may have seen a headline that said, oh, there's no cash. Well, they valued it at $2.5 million. I'll tell you, for $2.5 million, I could go make maybe 2 rec centers, net zero buildings, and then I'd be looking for money and looking for programs again. What this is doing is really supporting a long-term structure with some accelerated advancements in the next 2 years. And I was about to say, it put our name out there, and we're getting calls from foundations that we've never heard from before, really famous ones. So I'm hoping we keep demonstrating that, and there will be also financial assistance. So.
All right, great. Thank you, Sharon. All right, now I'd like to turn over to Kelli to talk about her county work. And just want to say that even though she's talking about her county, every time I go to a national meeting, someone tells me about her work before they know I'm from Pinellas County. So that's how good of a job she's doing.
I feel very privileged, but yeah. So yeah, Sharon is a great partner in our largest city. Pinellas County, a lot of people are like, well, what is Pinellas County? Well, we're really the city for the unincorporated area, which is the largest area of the county. But we do have a lot of county-wide programs like beach nourishment and mosquito control, water navigation control authority, countywide fertilizer management ordinance, mangrove protection. So we do have a lot of countywide programs that we do for all the cities, but we are pretty much the city for the unincorporated area, which is very diverse. We have coastal communities like Crystal Beach up in the north part of the county. We have central communities like High Point, and then we have barrier island communities like Treasure Island, or like Terra Verde, excuse me. So it's kind of all over the place in the types of communities we have, not just their diversity in where they live, but the diversity in their economics and their social structures. They're very different communities, and so it kind of really requires the county to be very adaptive in our approaches, because we don't have contiguous boundaries like a lot of the cities do, where you can work with your community right there. We're all over the place. So it does create a little bit of a challenge. As Mayor Johnson mentioned, clearly tourism is what Pinellas County is known for, but what's little known fact is our biggest economy is actually manufacturing. So our economic development does a lot of really good work in trying to bring those types of companies here, especially the high-wage manufacturing jobs. It's a big driver. We have great parks and green space, especially along our coastal system. So again, if you kind of go to the north, you see Philippi Park all along border there of Tampa Bay. You flip over to the other side of the county, we've got Wellspring Park way up on the St. Joseph Sound, and we've got Boca Ciega Millennium Park on Boca Ciega Bay. So we have a lot of beautiful green space and parks along our coastal systems. And I think, the most recent Red Tide event was a real eye-opener for everyone on how connected the quality of our environment is to our overarching economy and our quality of life. It really had an impact, and we're still answering and taking a lot of questions about that. And as the sea level rise and other climate factors change, we need to ensure that we don't lose those connections and when we act very sustainably in our decision making. So what was the impetus for some of what we're doing? Well, formally, we actually put sea level rise and climate change at the forefront during the development of our 2008 comprehensive plan. So if you go and take a peek at the old one, there was a great comprehensive planner, Liz Freeman, and she retired a few years back, but her and I were compadres, and we were like, we're going to get this in there. And we did, and we had it in various areas of the comp plan, but it wasn't this overarching theme that it needed to be. It was in different areas, and we needed to make sure that people were thinking about it. Given our location, our risk to storms, our low-lying elevation, it's just common sense. And obviously, more recently, the Climate Science Advisory Panel, which Libby is our wonderful facilitator, was a big motivator. When that first report came out in 2015, it was like, oh, wow, we need to do something. And that was a really big deal. Our commissioner, Janet Long, has been driving a lot of the recent initiatives, including the Tampa Bay Regional Resiliency Coalition that CJ is really leading. She was the chair of the Regional Planning Council last year, and this was her #1 thing that she wanted to get done. It was just her passion, and she continues to lead the steering committee. And just a little fun fact, we just received the 2019 Citizen Survey data, and we have a question in there regarding sea level rise and whether people are actually concerned about it. And so last year, the report was whether or not you were concerned a great deal or at least to a certain extent, and then the other 2 questions were I'm not concerned about it, I'm concerned about it a little or not at all. And so last year, 42% of citizens that took the survey were either greatly concerned or concerned to a certain extent, and this year that number is up to 68%. People are paying attention. It's and we're monitoring that and trying to get the pulse of that. Libby mentioned, some of the work that I've been doing, built a capital planning tool so that our project managers, our infrastructure managers can assess risk and vulnerability. As we build infrastructure, we adapt and we make sure that we're not building the same infrastructure that we would have built 50 years ago today. And we make sure that we're really maximizing our return on investment. Been training a lot of folks to utilize that tool. We're actually taking the tool to the next level. It looks like we're going to have some state funding. Thank you, Whitney Gray. I know you're not here, but I'm giving you a shout out anyway, to build an automated web-based tool that will be available to anyone to use it. I mean, anybody can have it now. You just email me and I send it to you. But this will be a lot easier, a lot better for everyone. It's going to be very automated and make life a lot easier. We're also in the final steps of hiring an actual sustainability and resiliency coordinator. Thank you. To really help pull all this together. We have a lot of great things going on in the county, but it's all over the place, and we kind of need to bring it all in and coalesce it and make sure that we have cohesive sustainability metrics so that we can set our benchmarks and measure our progress. Right now, I'm finalizing the data collection for our organization's carbon footprint analysis, which is almost done. Very happy to have that done, and again, that's a benchmark. That gives us a place. We know where we're starting from, and then we have somewhere to work from. We have a countywide vulnerability assessment of critical infrastructure going on. It's a very high-level tool looking at all sorts of infrastructure from north to south and east to west. It includes all the cities. Storm surge modeling coupled with sea level rise on top of it so that we can really get a good view of where our vulnerability and risk is, and then adaptation planning going forward. We are in the process of rewriting our comprehensive plan, so I'd encourage all county residents to get involved in that. Sustainability and resiliency are the overarching theme of the plan, so this is a real moment to get into the specifics of that plan, whether you're passionate about transportation or natural resources, whatever it is, that is going to be the overarching theme as we go forward. We updated our stormwater code, so it has higher tailwater conditions, so that now newer development, it's taking into account sea level rise. So I will say it's frustrating some of the development community just a little bit, but old dogs need to learn new tricks, right? We all do. So I think that's about it. And we're also hiring an energy manager to help with all of our buildings and our fleet and really making improvements in our efficiency. So very exciting stuff.
All right. Okay. Thank you, Kelly. And we'll turn it over to CJ for the regional perspective.
Yes, good afternoon, and I'm quite privileged to be here this afternoon. I've only been in my position about 90 days now. I started January 7th at the Regional Planning Council. Before that, I was at the University of South Florida College of Marine Science, where I worked on climate change adaptation with stakeholders, including local governments for many years. So thank you both to all of you for all the fantastic work that you're doing, which also makes the larger group more interesting and creating new opportunities here. So the Regional Planning Council is an organization. There's actually, I believe, 10 throughout the state right now. So we work in a regional component. Our jurisdiction goes all the way up to Citrus County and as far down as Manatee County at this point. But we also collaborate with the cities inside the counties. There are member governments that have been participating. I believe the organization, the council, was formed in 1963. So it's probably things that you've never heard about, but often seen different initiatives that have been moving forward on early days of growth management. So the council exists really to convene and serve as an opportunity for local governments to work on challenging issues together across the borders of our cities and counties as well. So it's gone back on a number of issues. And the Tampa Bay Regional Planning Council has a phenomenal staff, and there's a number of previous employees in the room who even go on to do fantastic things, as well as members of the local government. The council's been working on, I guess you'd call it resiliency or extreme weather events for about 20 years, going back doing a very first hurricane evacuation study for the state. Other aspects have included, the lunch speaker mentioned the Hurricane Phoenix simulation that was developed at the Regional Planning Council. There's also a scary video that goes along with that. And on the upside for this coming thing, what we'll be doing is updating that. They just received a grant from the Economic Development Administration to update that modeling that's behind that and conduct and develop a new video. So those pictures are probably going to even get more scarier. But it's an important education tool, and that's a lot of what the council has done, both on things where it's not an issue that's unique to a specific government, but something we all share. So the hurricane guides that many of you have probably seen over the years, our council works with the counties to produce those that then go out. So most currently, and as Kelly explained, that Commissioner Long had been, as chair of the council last year, made climate change and resiliency her priority, which led to the formation of the Regional Resiliency Coalition, which currently has now the 6 counties and 20 cities signed the Memorandum of Understanding, which is it's a pretty good, solid document, 2-3 pages, which really lays out what the current perspectives and risks are in 7 sections that they agreed to collaborate on, which is specific to sea level rise, defining common methods and for working together to identify our vulnerabilities. So that's one of the things that's interesting. You know, cities can sit right next to each other, but take very different approaches from how they might be documenting certain aspects. So of course there's consistency among disciplines. So you have the stormwater, you have parks, you have other components, but there's many different mechanisms and business and government accounting perspectives. So what we're working on with the coalition and with the government partners who are at the table to develop consistent methodologies to identify risk and vulnerability. So when we look at it, we can know what we're talking about across the table, across the city, across multiple counties, and then looking for these opportunities to work together on resiliency. And that ranges because it's really interesting. So I've been to Pasco County, I've been out to Plant City, down to Manatee County, and when we talk about climate change, it really has, and sea level rise has different impacts. And as you know, it's not all just the coastal, but what's happening to our water supply and potential for saltwater intrusion into freshwater systems, Quite significantly, the things that are visual, as the media panel talked about this morning, is that there's a lot more recognition, generally speaking, for how the small amounts of sea level rise are affecting the drainage components. So when you talk about that, what is happening, and this causes this nuisance flooding, so there's greater and greater awareness. And I've been looking at this probably since about 2009 myself. So tracking what the research that Kelli has said, that other studies have shown, more and more folks are acknowledging that things are happening and wanting to do something about it. So that's what we're going to be working on together. So this regional coalition has the steering committee, which is the elected officials who meet monthly to discuss future direction, help define categories of action that the staff and the Regional Planning Council, as me supporting the staff, will all do together. These things including engaging our partner organizations, such as the universities, the colleges, businesses, NGOs, groups like the League, et cetera, as well as individual private sector businesses and professional associations. So most recently I had meetings with the Suncoast chapter of the American Planning Association. There's about 500 planners in these counties, and they really have a great insight. Some of them are private sector, some of them are in the government, into what some of the challenges are. How do we do long-range planning? What different capacities do we need to think about? And then meeting with the U.S. Green Building Council, and on my list of other folks to meet with are the stormwater associations, as well as the civil engineers and environmental professionals, because working together within the professional disciplines will help bring new resources and best practices and ideas in a consistent manner. So it's not just one engineer from one area saying something and we all say, oh yeah, it's a great idea, or that's a bad idea. How do we bring up knowledge across multiple disciplines that all will help us become more resilient? So a few of the other things we're going to be looking at, and I wanted to mention a study that's in process currently with the three municipal planning organizations for Hillsborough County, Pinellas, and Pasco, is quite right now looking at sea level rise impacts, which also layer in Category 3 impacts and a 9-inch rain event on the transportation systems. So this research that's being modeled also looks at what are the economic impacts of that, of those situations, of those conditions, what happens. It's a short-term time frame because it's related to certain transportation facility components. It just looks at 2045. And some of the numbers are pretty substantial when you think about whether it's a hurricane or an extreme flooding event. If something happens to the one area of the Gandy Bridge, how does it impact the businesses around there? Logistics, transportation, the impact to the larger regional economic systems. As, we're talking people's jobs and access to food and all kinds of things. So we're working on a variety of those things. Other things that I'm particularly interested in because of my background is really the social factors, the social aspects, social vulnerability. How do we address the existing circumstances that we know from, our neighbors who have, my neighbors, fixed income, they've been retired for 20 years, they can't even afford the plywood to put up for a hurricane. They don't have the physical ability to drive and leave the area, but they're not going to a shelter. So we have a lot of social factors that we have to understand. What does resiliency short-term mean? And how can we work together within our communities to help make those people more resilient? And what does that take, in addition to me just running my cable for my generator over to their house? What else can we all think about collectively to do that? And in that factor, because of my background in the research side, we're able to work with different universities, both locally and outside the region, who are sort of experts in taking the pulse of citizens. So I want to put this idea out for a collaboration with Jacqueline and David, and with you all. So Yale is very interested in starting a large survey of residents in the region, and they want to know what questions should they be asking regarding individual resiliency behaviors. So I would like to throw this out, and maybe we'll get some structure to that so there's something you can interact and respond to and send some advice, collecting your input. What individual resiliency or adaptation behaviors should we study? And so I'm interested in that because, there's a great number of people who actually don't buy flood insurance. So that's a big question. Why not? Are we not aware? We don't think we live in a flood zone. But I'm not satisfied that that's just about resiliency. I believe in the collective action of y'all and me working together to support and provide support to the mayor that says, yes, we want our local governments to take action. We want investment in infrastructure. We're willing to accept some fees that are going to have to come along with that. How are we going to pay for this? So these are some of the additional research questions that I'll be working with our coalition members. What is it that they need to prioritize for their specific community groups in terms of research? How do we work together consistently on these things, including the economic, the cultural, the social, as well as the infrastructure? And thanks for having me here today.
All right, thank you, CJ. Okay, now we're going to turn it over to questions from the audience. I want you to think as you ask your question, whether it is directed for just one of our panelists or whether you'd like, a short, concise answer from all of our panelists. Please remember to use your time to ask a question and not share opinions or statements so that we could get to as many questions and move the discussion along as much as possible. So I see one hand in the back.
This is the question. I'm on, okay. This is the question for really, I think, both ends of the spectrum of the panel, Mayor Johnson and also the regional planning folks. For areas like St. Pete Beach, Shore Acres, these hyper-vulnerable areas that are very low, in the very long-term planning, is there consideration of abandonment as the next logical investment criterion for government funding?
Would you like me to answer that?
Please. please answer that one for me. It's not an option for me. Go ahead.
So
Can you repeat the question just concisely?
I believe the question was about the areas that are extremely and critically vulnerable and likely to be extensively inundated at some point in time. Are we considering, how would be local governments and groups like ours considering abandonment? It is a good question. There are many thinkers working on that issue. Currently, the most important work that we can be doing is identifying the repeated flood loss area properties, identifying what is future risk, what is current risk, and looking at what we can do to start moving some folks into other areas. But there's a lot of research that shows that people like the communities that they live in. Even out of the research out of Hurricane Sandy up in New York, when citizens were offered buyouts after disasters with pieces that were still remaining, if the land is purchased, the house is purchased and returned to a natural state that enables protection for the rest of the community and enables us to enjoy the nature, people are more supportive of those kind of buyouts where we're going to make that land. If the land is then used for additional redevelopment that results in luxury condominiums and no one gets to benefit except some other folks, except for me when I had my little house on slab on grade, those are social challenges that are showing that it's going to be more complicated. So yes, how we will need to move our people, where we will need to relocate, is going to require transparency of what's going to happen, what's already happening. So the great program that Pinellas County has with their flood center and the information and the community rating system is helping to educate retailers currently about parcels and what's going on. So you might go look that up. I'm not using the right name. What is that? The Pinellas Flood Information Center?
Yeah, Pinellas County Flood Mapper. If you just Google that, you can pull up not only your property and your flood risk, but you can also lay a sea level rise on top of it.
It's a phenomenal tool. It really does, for the region, one of the more advanced, and that's because of their commitment for a very strong flood insurance program and a community rating system. Lisa Foster rocks. She's good.
All right. Did anyone else on the panel want to add anything?
I think I would like to say one thing about that is that I remember back in 2004 when I got evacuated 2 weekends in a row. I think it was Francis and Jean with the two storms. My neighbor said, well, if I get wiped out and I come back and there's nothing there, I'm not rebuilding, I'm moving. And I said, well, you need to rebuild and then sell it because the dirt's worth more than the building. Now what we're looking at is the potential of the whole island disappearing and we become the sandbar that we started out being. So You know, it developed when they started putting bridges in. It used to be back in the 20s, you couldn't get to St. Pete Beach without taking a boat. And that's not the case anymore. You can get there pretty easily. And so there went property values and the desire to live there, and we became a city instead of just a little shack on the water. So it's kind of an interesting long-term look, because right now our biggest concerns are seeing how FEMA's treating us for the flood mapping that they're doing, and thank God it's been an improvement for us. But the big storm that comes in off the Gulf doesn't care what your base flood elevation is. It's gonna wipe out what it's gonna wipe out. And you know, if you look at where we were headed, and you saw the stuff this morning, we're gonna disappear and be underwater probably another 100 years. So where do we go from here?
Okay.
If I could just add one little thing, Libby.
Okay,
Sorry, I just
yeah,
wanted to
yeah,
add
Libby,
one
sure.
thing, is I think before Mayor Johnson's underwater, it's going to be a financial issue, is that the flood insurance is going to get to be so expensive that, you know, only certain populations are going to be able to or be willing to pay. At the end of the day, you know, the insurance companies are way ahead of all of us. They've got the models, they've got the data, and they're going to start backing out. And when they do that, it's going to get to the point where if you want to live there, you're going to have to self-insure. If you're willing to do that, great. But if you're not, then, you know, I think you're going to start to be seeing some folks just voluntarily migrating out. I'm one of those people. I used to live on St. Key. I migrated out after the storm of the century, and I now live in one of those lovely white areas, high and dry. You're welcome to camp out in my backyard.
What's your address?
I'll give it to you later.
And if you're asking us what year to sell, we don't have that answer. That's probably the most common question I get asked. And I know a lot of scientists that study this that live on the water, because there's a quality of life choice, and that's a lot of what happens in Pinellas County. Gentleman over here has the next question.
Hi. I wanted to thank you all for the work you're doing, especially on Pinellas side. I live in Tampa, and we could use a lot of that leadership over on our side, so thank you for that. One thing I didn't hear represented in the conversation was the utilities, specifically Duke. I know that they get about less than 1% of their energy from solar energy. So how have those conversations been going? We're dealing with our own fight with Tampa Electric. They're trying to build a big gas plant over there. How are those conversations going with reducing greenhouse gas emissions at the utility level, and what can we do as consumers to help nudge them in that direction?
Can any of you speak to the waste to energy plant as well?
Well, you know, I do know, and unfortunately I don't really have an update too much, but I do know that Commissioner Long, again, who's kind of our champion on the board, as well as our county administrator, just met with Duke to kind of talk to them about, you know, the resiliency of our infrastructure and future of, you know, what the, you know, energy source plan kind of looks at out into the future. And I think we'll probably hear more about that soon. I hope we do. We are kind of incorporating their infrastructure into our coastal vulnerability assessment, or not coastal, but our vulnerability assessment, so that we can look for weaknesses, because obviously their weaknesses are our weaknesses. And the county does have a waste energy plan. If you're not familiar with it, you know, we burn a significant amount of our trash and generate electricity to power thousands and thousands of homes and businesses. You know, back in the day when the waste energy plant was constructed, that wasn't the thought. The thought wasn't, you know, about being, you know, about climate change and all of that. It was the fact that we have one landfill, and if we have to start trucking our trash out of the county somewhere else, it's going to get really expensive really fast. So we were trying to maximize the longevity of our landfill, and the waste energy plan has allowed us to do that, because we burn the majority of what comes in from all of us, except for recyclables. So that waste energy plant is technically is kind of a recycling process, if you will. But I mean, that's another source, you know, that we are looking at. But yet, you know, the greater challenge with power in Florida is the regulations. And until we are in a more positive regulatory structure, it's going to be very challenging to not only, you know, drive that change, but drive our own choices to make change. So
in that,
keep that in mind.
And that's a perfect comment, because I think with the commitment to policy that this organization has and your action as citizens with a coordinated effort, the Public Service Commission is what sets the policies for the utilities to acquire, driving their components regarding renewable energy use, other components that they may offer to their groups in terms of other discounts or rebates, coordinated programs. If you look at Orange County, Orlando, which owns its own utility, the ability that they have to provide solar thermal hot water treatment facilities, they buy it in bulk, their profits go back to the community. So I know City of Tampa sort of lost its opportunity to when TECO was then bought by the Canadian company, but as a group, we can continue to pressure our legislator at the city, in Florida, and to ensure that we have better representation for needing to reduce these issues through the Public Service Commission. So it has to be local. You got to write this to our local folks why it matters. Then it needs to go to the state, which needs to have better appointees on the PSC. So it's not an easy fight, but we need to step that back up, because I believe the current governor does recognize that if we look at energy resiliency, the ability to use microgrids, which are like batteries and small amounts of solar for special services, whether they're for hospitals or the other sort of hurricane shelters or other city components, you all, the cities, need your power as citizens to say we need to be more energy resilient, and how that comes into play. There are a variety of options, and other folks can tell you more about it, but it is a political action. It needs to be the policy component, and you need to help us. Thank you. Sorry.
Okay, look at the gentleman, let's see, back there, and then this gentleman. Sorry. She's ready to
Having to do with policy, and this question is for all of you, to what degree do you feel that you've had bipartisan buy-in to the Regional Resiliency Collaborative? And can you think of examples of local lawmakers, local conservative lawmakers who've really embraced resiliency and are taking a lead on sea level rise adaptation?
Well, I just, for my little corner of the world, I want to tell you that we, you mentioned bipartisan. Well, I'm fortunate enough to be in a city where there's no parties associated with the office that I hold or any of our commissioners. Pinellas County is equally split between Republicans and Democrats, and only a slightly lower number than each of those is independents. St. Pete Beach, on the other hand, is 49% Republican and 27% Democrat. And they elected a Democratic mayor. Now, those people have been talking climate change for a long time because they live there. All the people that I know all the owners of the major resorts, and vitally, vitally interested in making sure that we take care of our environment, that we're resilient when it comes to storms. And also, just as an example, the bed tax numbers for last year came out, and we just came close to making $60 million in bed tax in the county. I have the distinction of being the second biggest bed tax generator of any municipality in the county, next to Clearwater Beach. And George Creedicosta doesn't really count because he's a mainland city as well. But but the thing is that we generate all that bed tax because of our tourism economy. When you look at, and she takes care of my beaches, I love her. But the thing that's really cool about that is that when you looked at last year's numbers, the year before we generated like $57 million, and they were hoping to hit 60. They missed it. Every month was over the year before by about 2 to 3%, except October, red tide. It was down 18% from the year before. So it shows you the effect of whatever caused, whatever environmental causes had the red tide hang around for over a year. It decimated our tourist industry for a whole month. We get a hurricane comes through and it hurts us for a week, and something like red tide can hurt us for good when you look at it long term.
Thank you. Okay, I go to this gentleman. Do we have the microphone?
Hello.
Wait, it's coming. I think the microphone's also recording.
I'm one of those people who lives in a white area as far as evacuation zones, but I'm also in an AE floodplain, and I have to pay $1,600 a year in flood insurance through FEMA. Although I also own property in the city of Tampa that has to be evacuated supposedly because of storm surge, but they're not in an area that's required to be insured by FEMA. So I'm always confused because of that. But anyway, my question to the panel is, now that we're in the process of getting the new FEMA, new and revised floodplain maps, and I found out that ours is not going to change, unfortunately. What is your feeling toward FEMA being a little more proactive or more accurate in their use of assessments to help solve some of the problems we have here now as far as the risks that people are having to take by considering, buying property or building businesses?
Who wants to take that?
I don't want to take that. No.
Your turn.
All right, so the question, the bottom line is that this challenge is too big for anyone to take on alone. And in order for this to be effective, we need federal leaders, we need state leaders, we need local leaders. And that's just the bottom line. They have the big money. The federal government, a lot of people, you either love or hate beach nourishment, and I'm not really sure where I land. It's something that's part of my job. But the bottom line is this Pinellas County made a investment in our barrier islands before I was born, and therefore stopping now would destroy people's lives, people's jobs, people's livelihoods, their families. It's just not something that we can do. Whereas in South Carolina, the coast goes where the coast goes. They let it go. That's, they're letting Mother Nature do things, and that's, another perspective. But the federal government pays for about 68% of that coastal nourishment. So this last nourishment, I think in total, when you add all the pieces together, is over $52 million that we just did last year. And just keep in mind that 68% of that was paid for by the federal government. About 20% of that was paid for by Pinellas County bed taxes. And then the other portion of it was actually paid for by the state. So without that partnership, without those linkages, we would not be able to effectively manage our coast in order to protect the properties, to protect the infrastructure, to provide sea turtle nesting habitat and shorebird nesting habitat, and all those things that beaches bring with it, and the area for the tourists to come. FEMA does also offer some really great programs with regard to mitigating disaster. And they have grant programs where we can actually utilize those funds to go in and buy those repetitive loss properties so that we aren't going back and making the same mistake over and over again. That's the whole point, is like, if it's gonna flood, then let's get them out of there and let's restore that area and let it go back to its natural function, what it is. So, my perspective on FEMA is that I want them to be more of a partner. We need them. We need their leadership, we need their tools, we need their money, we need their expertise. They have a much bigger picture. They're seeing everything across the entire country. We're here looking at our little microcosm. They can bring lessons learned to us that we don't know anything about. They have a lot of capacities that we can learn, that we can absorb into our community and make us better. I personally like having them as a partner. They've been, FEMA and our federal partners in general are so collaborative with us. We're doing a big study right now looking at our southern beaches and hopefully including St. Pete Beach in that analysis. And
I'm
part
getting
of the
sand next month.
I know you're getting sand next month.
Thank you.
We're starting in May. So, but and we built those rock groins. So
we love the rock groins.
Yeah. So you see how this works. He doesn't have a city. I'm not doing your work for you. But again, he doesn't have the city. We don't have the money to do the work.
Well, that's part of it.
And Army Corps is actually doing, has bringing the contractor in. So from my perspective, whether it's FEMA or it's Army Corps, whether it's DEP or it's, FWC, or if it's Pinellas County or it's St. Pete Beach, we're family and we have to work like that. We just do.
I would also add to that as well that, from from the citizen perspective, oftentimes, your federal flood insurance seems, I was going to say it seems static. It probably seems like it's rising, but you don't see all the behind the scenes work as well. So it's not as static as it might seem, in that they're constantly looking at the National Flood Insurance Program and reassessing it. And the Community Rating System Manual was rewritten probably about 4 years ago based on analyses by Sam Brody at Texas A&M that showed that open space and increasing the amount of open space in a municipality, as well as raising the freeboard of homes, were the two things that caused real risk reduction for that community in terms of impacts from flood. So,
Real quick follow-up.
Sure.
FEMA is $26 billion in the hole right
Yes.
now. We just saw this scenario in Phoenix where if we had a similar storm here, if we had a storm here, there would be catastrophic losses.
Correct.
Where would the money come from under the current system? I mean, the money's got to come from somewhere if it's not us. Florida is a donor state as far as FEMA money income. It's going other places. Why isn't there more local interest, it seems to me, in pressuring our national leadership to make it more equitable for everybody?
I'm not sure that I would agree with Florida being a donor state if we looked at 2004 and 2005 and now and Irma and Michael and where we might go in the future. So
Number of policyholders.
Yeah, I mean, as far as from elected officials, I can tell you, because I see our Board of County Commissioners, their legislative priorities, and flood insurance is always on there. And they just about a month ago had a meeting with a federal delegation. Congressman Christ and Bilirakis were there, and Congressman Rubio and Scott's representatives were there, and this was one of the topics that came up is the fact that how do we fix the system? These constant extensions aren't working. We really need to buckle down and get an equitable assessment of what the true risk is and what people should be paying. And Pinellas County is one of those very policy-heavy states that is very impacted by this program. So I do want you to know that it is on their priority, it is on their list, and feel free to reach out to any of the county commissioners about it, because it's always right there at the top of their legislative priorities, and they bring it up at every opportune time they have.
Thank you. I do want to, speaking of elected officials, I wanted to take a moment to recognize Pinellas County Commissioner Janet Long, who has joined us. So,
let me just say quickly that I did not see her when I said that. So, so that was my honest answer. I love her, by the way.
So we appreciate Commissioner Long's time today, as well as her work on all of these initiatives. I believe someone has the microphone for the next question right here. Gentleman up front.
Yeah, building on that last question, I have read where some communities and counties are finding that FEMA's maps are not sufficiently accurate and don't show the vulnerability as severe as it is, and they are therefore developing their own maps, which are being used by the banks and the insurance companies. I don't know whether it's accurate or not, it's just what I've seen.
Well, from our city's perspective, we were happy to see the new maps come out. They're being adopted, I think, this summer. But about 95% of our island got a better rating. And we've done a lot of things in terms of land development codes and stuff like that, building codes, to where we've got a free board now. We're going to actually, the place I live in is now 2 feet higher above base flood elevation than it was before the maps got put together. But to go that a little further with that, I've got one of my commissioners is in the real estate business, so she's vitally interested in what we do with flood insurance and how we plan around that so that the houses that are on our island remain affordable. I'm in a position where, as much as I'm living on a barrier island, my flood insurance is $300 or $400 a year. And it's because I'm in a townhouse and you don't insure anything on the bottom. It's, my living area is actually 17 feet above sea level, where my garage is not, which is kind of neat because you go walking through the garage and you can't put anything electrical within 11 feet of base flood. And so you can tell where my slab is posed because all the switches and all the plugs are about shoulder level in the place. And that makes it totally affordable. All the stuff that's being built new is built up, so you have parking underneath. There's a lot of the old homes, the old 50s and early 60s vintage homes that sit right on grade, and they have very high premiums for their insurance. I think they started hearing what was going on back. We've got an island on the south end. I think I've got a resident here who lives there, Vina Del Mar. That was the last spoil island built. And you look on that thing, and the elevation of the street in that place is about 8-9 feet above sea level. There's some people on that island that don't need flood insurance, don't have to have it because they're up high enough.
Mary, can we clarify what freeboard is for those?
It's like a cushion between where you can build relative to your base flood elevation. And we actually looked at adding another foot to ours until the new maps were coming out, so we didn't. But we've still got a very good flood rating for a barrier island. It's kind of unique.
And before,
I just
Kelli,
wanted to, sorry.
That's okay. If
we are reviewing your maps, our maps, we are reviewing them. We are reviewing them very carefully. We have a consultant team on that's helping us do it. Some of the cities have also signed on to the agreement, so we are paying very close attention to those maps. We're having them reviewed with our own floodplain, because we do a lot of floodplain mapping ourselves, and we want to make sure that there's consistency and that we're comfortable with it.
And also, when FEMA came to give their soft rollout, about 2 years ago, I think, we realized that they were not incorporating the new LiDAR that the county was flying of our elevation, so that was going to be more accurate. And so through that cooperation, we're able to help them make their maps more accurate. I think we have time for 2 more questions. I'll take this one, and then I would like one focused for Sharon Wright. So if you could think about, we'll see what this question is, but I want to hear a little more from Sharon. Yes.
Isn't it a little bit counterproductive that since we know sea level is going to rise, at least if we see what we saw today, I hate to ask it this way, I don't mean aiming at anyone in particular, but to say that the maps now show it might be a foot lower, to now lower everything instead of, while we have the chance, make it 4 foot higher instead of lower, because eventually this is going to catch us. And can't we plan ahead instead of say, can we build to the minimum? Can't we plan ahead for 30 years and say that's our plan?
Yeah, we aren't doing anything in terms of building lower. We know better than that. But the one thing that the new floodplain maps has done is made flood insurance a lot more affordable on the island, or it will when they adopt them. We're still not building anything at grade level. Anything that's built now that has to be FEMA compliant. If you renovate a place and it's more than 50% of the value, you have to go up. You can't build at grade if it's like that.
That is a good question and a good clarification, I think. Yes, back by Jacqueline.
So I'll ask Sharon a question. We've talked a lot about individual housing, but I'm curious if there's long-range planning for like the wastewater treatment plant to be relocated inland or structures like that. Sorry, Libby asked us to give you a question, so I thought I'd throw that one out there. I'm blaming it on her.
Thanks.
Well, and this is not what I completely prepared for, but I mean the Southwest plant isn't going anywhere to my knowledge in quite some time. As a matter of fact, we're building new infrastructure there for the biosolids plant to make energy out of that waste. And if you're speaking about the Albert Whitted plant, I haven't heard anything lately about that. The original idea was to turn that into a different, more edge of water adaptable use, and then there's some controversy and some, what I believe, from what I've seen, perception that closing that plant caused some of the issues. There's a lot of things that causes issues, and we do have capacity. So I do not actually know the latest plans for that one.
Okay, yep, in the back.
Dr. McDonald earlier talked about the carry point for an area, but he didn't specifically mention Pinellas County. So is Pinellas County above its carry point as far as population or below? And if it gets above that point, what will happen to resiliency plans?
So I think we're talking about kind of carrying capacity in terms of the resources, the infrastructure that we could provide for our residents. So we know we're built out. We know now we're in a redevelopment phase in our county. We see a lot of building up that we haven't seen before, and I think even some codes maybe. With the city of St. Pete, are they changing some codes to allow for increased density, or kind of the small home idea? I'm hearing chatter, and I don't know what's truth from fiction.
We're looking at a lot of different kinds of codes and especially as it relates to affordable housing and what can we do to, be more flexible and keep our character to do those things. So yes, when it comes to tiny homes, shipping containers, what should or could be built on the water. One main thing, one larger effort that's currently going on is the coastal high hazard maps have doubled, almost doubled what we have as coastal high hazard in the city of St. Pete. We already have a regulation that says you cannot increase density in the coastal high hazard area. Well, if you know St. Pete at all, our 4th Street corridor is there. Our Gateway Employment Center is there. And so we're looking at how to better balance what we can do there, and we still, I believe the overarching theme being overall density doesn't increase, but where that kind of a rule doesn't necessarily make sense because a strip center on 4th Street can't extend their canopy or something, that's not the idea of doing this. And so the planning department is currently working on, based on a Norfolk, Virginia model, but then evolving it into our own kind of a menu of things that developers may do to then apply for additional density. It's not automatic, but it's really looking at definitely the things to be more resilient, like increased height and things like that, and hardening, but even a menu of mitigating things like energy efficiency, high HVAC, and including affordable housing. I believe we got a ULI grant to have a national expert team review what we come up with for that. So we'll see where that goes.
So I would just like to say, from a perspective of the need to continue to understand what they mean by carrying capacity. So I think there's some questions there about what are we talking about? Is it, short-term storm risk capacity, and if the bridge went down, how do we get food here? There's different components. So I would say it's an important question for us to think about what does that mean, and then look at how we might collect data to understand how the interconnectivity to the different systems, what does that mean? I think from a framing perspective of density, we have certain social perspectives. We like our open spaces, and so other times we want suburban components. I think the big question is, it's going to be quite varied based on where you live. Pinellas County is all not a monolithic, so the cities are not monolithic. So I think we need to work together to understand what that question is, to really look at it in an integrative component, and then figure out what things we can do to make things better. I think that's the overall thing, and what it's been so exciting to work with the different local governments and the elected officials on what are those initiatives, how do we prioritize, what approaches do we use, and how do we do this in a consistent manner so it benefits our economics, our quality of life, our natural environment, which is why we're all drawn here. So
okay. I have one follow-up question for each of the panelists, and then they will be around for discussion on the breaks. But first, I have a question for the audience, and this will be a show of hands question. And I think you might have answered this on your registration, but this will help our panelists answer their question. How many of you would consider yourselves a member of kind of the interested public who's here on a personal kind of information gathering basis? Okay, a very large amount, which there might be crossover. It's okay to raise your hand twice. How many of you would consider yourself professionals that are here kind of gathering information that you can apply to your jobs, or that could include volunteer work? Okay, about half. Great. And then how many of you are students currently? A few. Great. All right. Well, my question for the panelists is, how can the folks in this room, in whatever capacity they raise their hands, engage with you and the networks that you work with to kind of get their voices heard and increase their voices, as we've heard, their desire to share their knowledge with other community members and get other community members involved? So we'll start. You don't have to start if you don't want to.
I'll
Okay.
start.
Okay.
What the heck? Yeah, of course, the best way is that, it's easy these days with the emails and cell phones and all that. I mean, if, in my case, you're looking at my staff. So, you want to get in touch with me, you go ahead and click on the link on the commission website, the commission portion of the city website, or my cell phone is listed right there, and it's on my business card. So that's the best way to do it. If you can, we have literally an open setup. There isn't a commissioner in my city that has an office at City Hall. We all use the clerk's office when we go there, so we meet there. But in a lot of cases, it's just send an email, send me a phone call, anything at all. I don't know any of the commissioners that's hiding from anyone, and they're a great bunch, and they care deeply about their city. And even though they're elected, I'm a commissioner, but I'm elected citywide where they have their own districts. But once elected, we all have the same authority for the whole city. So it's anything in any of the city can do that. But I think you need to make noise. That's the only way you get stuff done. You got to make noise.
Do you currently have citizens advisory boards in St. Pete?
Yes, we have counting the pension boards, and we got 3 of those. There's 11 different committees. Probably the reason I got elected, I was the chairman of our finance and budget committee for a few years and was on the committee for 5. I was Recreation Advisory Board before that, but we've got Library Board, we got the Beach Stewardship Board, we got a Historic Preservation Board, and for the most part, they're all active. We've got a Planning Board as well. It meets once a month. So does our Board of Adjustment, which does variances from code. We get a lot of input. In some cases, we've got 5 people making the decisions, but in many cases, stuff comes to us that 10 different people have seen it already. So you get 15 people really having input on a government level for any of the big decisions we make, and I think it's a process that has really helped us move forward in rationally. We're not doing anything crazy out there. So yeah, that's it. We have a lot of citizen input. Personally, I do a Monday night an hour open office at our library because they're open till 8 o'clock. So from 6 to sometimes 8 o'clock, I'm sitting there just listening to people ask questions, it's complaints, it's everything. It's part of being a local government. It's, between the county and the cities, the governments are very, very accessible. So you take advantage of that, please do, because that's where it starts. We're going to listen to you. So, just speak up.
Thank you. And we are butting up against our time, so if we could do about a minute each, and I'm sorry for not.
Okay,
taking you
students, volunteer, get my card. We have a lot of volunteers and interns in our office, and if you want to be engaged in this type of work, you want to actually do it. I can't pay you, but for a few hours a week, I can get you a lot of experience. All right, I can put you to work on a little project, and you can count it for credit at school. All right. Everybody in here should be involved in the Sea Level Rise Collaborative at St. Petersburg College. That's why we're here today. They engaged us all in this conversation. Sign up for their newsletters. Stay engaged in this topic. And he said, call your elected officials. All of our policymakers need to know what you care about in order to make the decisions that affect our community. Be constructive about it. Try not to be destructive about it. Share this information with your friends and family. That's the bottom line. Is I know we're probably preaching to the choir in here. Maybe your neighbor's not the choir, but maybe you can start to just kind of drop information, because that type of, as we start to change our culture, we truly change our community. And professionals, I know that sometimes even some of my partner agencies are like, when I talk about sea level rise and adapting their bridges or whatever it is, when they're designing new things, they roll their eyes at me. Okay, well, take them to just a different conversation and talk about the return on investment in that asset. If it's supposed to last 80 years, let's make it last 80 years. And here are some design changes that we can make in order to get you there, maximize your return on investment, reduce your maintenance costs, things like that. To have the different conversations that get you to the same endpoint. Next.
I would say for the businesses and the organizations and the associations in the room, you can go to the Tampa Bay Regional Planning Council's organization website, tbrpc.org, and click on Resiliency Coalition. There's a sign-up form for Resiliency Coalition partners. So we're looking for interested experts on a variety of disciplines to collaborate with us. So it helps us to work with organizations. I really respect the need for the local governments to hear directly from you all in your own districts, in your own jurisdictions. So I think as citizens, participating in whatever city action components would be very good, and I support what Kelli just said about participating with the St. Pete Collaborative.
Sharon?
One way to get involved is to check out our new Integrated Sustainability Action Plan Highlights Report. And there's so much in here. If there's some things you're passionate about, this is just the beginning. We're going to be working each of these issues in different ways and rolling out to the community. And specifically, as a bit of a follow-up to something CJ answered earlier, as it relates to the utilities, we're the first city in the state to commit to 100% clean energy. Now we have a lot of great company. We have our first ever clean energy roadmap. And we took comments from very activist leftist organizations, or that may be not the perfect characterization, but we also worked with Duke very closely on this, and what their idea of transparency was and what our idea of transparency was very different, and we plan to then roll out part of the Clean Energy Roadmap to make it more understandable on how you can talk to the Public Service Commission. What are the years, what are the steps, when do you need to be there, and when do you need to be telling your city? So if you want to work on that with us, please do. I think that the utilities have been we're building on the wins that we have with them, and we acknowledge in our ISAP that our goals do not align with Duke Energy's goals for renewable energy. And if those things don't start aligning more, we have a 2026 franchise agreement that we need to really be leveraging some stuff for. So help us get involved in that. And I brought one extra copy for Commissioner Long, so please don't leave without it.
Okay, well, let's thank the panel for their time and their dedication to these important issues. And who is up next? CJ, do you break?